At dawn on the 12th of March, 1507, a lone horseman charges out of the town of Viana, in the small kingdom of Navarre, chasing a party of raiders through the half-light. He outrides his own men. He does not look back to see that no one is behind him. In a dry ravine, the raiders turn, and they are not fleeing anymore. They do not know who he is. A lance takes him under the arm, where the armor opens. When it is over, they strip the body of its plate, its clothes, everything, and leave it naked on the stones, with more than 20 wounds. The man lying in that ravine was Cesare Borgia. 9 years earlier, he had been the most feared man in Italy, the son of a pope, the model, the living, breathing model for the most infamous book on power ever written. Niccolò Machiavelli sat across the table from him, watched him work, and distilled what he saw into the prince. And here is the fact that should stop you. The man who taught Machiavelli the rules of power broke them. Not one of them. 7. Each violation had a price, and each price was collected in full, until the final installment came due in a ravine in Spain, in a war that meant nothing, over a castle nobody remembers. That is what this is about. Not the rules of power as theory. The rules of power as an invoice itemized, dated, and paid by the one man history assumed understood them best. Because if the rules could destroy Cesare Borgia, they are certainly operating on you, right now, in rooms far smaller than his. And the way he died is not the part that should disturb you. The part that should disturb you is that he saw every one of his mistakes coming, named them out loud to Machiavelli himself, and made them anyway. To understand what he broke, you first have to understand what he built, because for 4 years, Cesare Borgia played the game of power almost perfectly, and the almost is where everything lives. He begins as a churchman, because his father decides he will be one. Rodrigo Borgia, a Spanish cardinal with a genius for administration and appetite, is elected Pope Alexander VI in August of 1492. Within a year, Cesare, 18 years old, is a cardinal of the Roman Church. He does not want the red hat. He wants the sword that has gone to his brother Juan. Then, in the summer of 1497, Juan is fished out of the Tiber with his throat cut and 9 stab wounds, and the path clears. Rome whispers that Cesare did it. The sources cannot prove it, and they cannot dismiss it, and Cesare never dignifies the question. What is documented is this. In August of 1498, he stands before the College of Cardinals and resigns the cardinalate. No cardinal in the history of the Church had ever done that before. Watch what that tells you about him. He is willing to hand back a guaranteed fortune to reach for an unguaranteed empire. That is the temperament Machiavelli would later call virtù, not virtue in the moral sense, but force of will, the capacity to act decisively on the world instead of waiting for it. France makes him a duke. King Louis XII needs a papal annulment of his marriage. Alexander needs a French army for his son. The trade is made without embarrassment on either side. Cesare becomes Duke of Valentinois. The Italians will simply call him Valentino, marries a French princess named Charlotte d'Albret, and rides back over the Alps with French lances at his back and a papal bull declaring the lords of the Romagna deposed. The Romagna is the lawless middle of Italy, a corridor of small tyrants who rule their cities badly and answer to the Pope in theory only. Cesare takes it apart city by city. Imola, Forlì, where Caterina Sforza holds the fortress against him and is dragged out of the ruins. Pesaro, Rimini, Faenza, whose young lord surrenders on a promise of safety and is later found drowned in the Tiber. Urbino falls in the summer of 1502 without a battle, taken by a maneuver so fast the Duke escapes with the clothes he is wearing. And here is what almost no one expects. He governs well. The Romagna had known nothing but extortion and private vendetta for a century. Cesare imposes order. He appoints a lieutenant, Ramiro di Orco, a hard Spaniard with full authority, and lets him break the province's violence with violence. It works, and it makes Ramiro hated. So, on the morning after Christmas, 1502, the people of Cesena wake to find Ramiro de Orco in the public square, cut into 2 pieces, with a wooden block and a bloody knife displayed beside the body. No trial, no explanation. Machiavelli, who was there in those months as the envoy of Florence, recorded the effect on the crowd in a phrase that has never been improved. The spectacle left the people satisfied and stupefied. The cruelty had been delegated, the mercy was claimed in person. It is one of the coldest, most instructive acts of political theatre ever staged, and Machiavelli put it in The Prince as a model. Days later comes Senigallia. Cesare's own hired captains, the condottieri Vitellozzo Vitelli, Oliverotto da Fermo, and the lords of the Orsini clan, had conspired against him that autumn, frightened of what he was becoming. He negotiates. He forgives. He invites them to the coastal town of Senigallia to celebrate the reconciliation, walks them into a house with every appearance of warmth, and arrests them all in a single motion. Vitellozzo and Oliverotto are strangled that same night, back to back in one room. The Orsini follow within weeks. Machiavelli witnessed the aftermath and wrote a report on the operation with something close to awe. All of Italy exhaled the same conclusion: this man cannot be trusted, and this man cannot be stopped. That is the peak. 27 years old, a state of his own carved out of the map, a reputation that does half his fighting for him, a father on the throne of St. Peter. Hold that image, because the descent begins in 8 months, and it begins with the rule he had been breaking since the day he was born. The first rule of power he broke is the foundation of all the others. Never build your house on ground another man owns. Everything Cesare had: the French title, the papal armies, the gold, the legitimacy of every conquest, flowed from one source, and that source was his father's pulse. Machiavelli names this precisely in the 7th chapter of The Prince, the chapter written about Cesare, where he divides new rulers into those who rise by their own arms and ability virtue, and those who rise by the arms and fortune of others, fortuna. Fortune, Machiavelli writes, builds fast and builds hollow. Cesare knew it. The documented record shows he spent 1,503 racing to convert borrowed power into owned power, recruiting his own troops, courting the Romagna's loyalty, stockpiling money. He was solving the right problem. He was solving it on a clock he did not control. The clock stopped on the 18th of August, 1503. Cesare and his father dined at a cardinal's vineyard outside Rome earlier that month. Within days, both were gravely ill. Malaria, almost certainly, in a Roman summer that was killing men all over the city, though naturally the whisper of poison attached itself to the Borgia name forever. Alexander VI, 72 years old, died in days. Cesare, at the exact hour when every plan he had depended on his ability to move, could not stand up. He lay burning with fever in the Vatican, while his world came apart in the streets below, able to command, unable to act. And this is where the second broken rule presents its bill. Never assume the storm will schedule itself around you. Years later, Cesare said something to Machiavelli that Machiavelli thought important enough to preserve in The Prince, and it may be the most quietly devastating confession in the literature of power. He had thought, he said, of everything that might happen when his father died, and had prepared an answer for all of it, except that he never imagined that when the day came, he himself would also be dying. Read that again. He does not claim he was surprised. He claims he had planned for every version of the crisis, except the one where the crisis did not wait for him to be ready. That is not an excuse. That is a man describing the exact shape of the hole in his own thinking. Contingency that depends on your best day is not contingency. It is hope wearing armor. Still, he almost survives it. Sick, he bargains from his bed. Rome fills with his enemies. The Orsini come back for blood. The dispossessed lords crawl back toward the Romagna, and here is the one asset that holds, the one thing he built with his own hands. The Romagna itself stays loyal. The cities he governed do not rise against him. Machiavelli noticed that too, and marked it the foundations Cesare laid himself were the only ones that did not crack. But a new pope must be elected, and now we arrive at the center of this story, the decision around which everything before and after arranges itself. Follow this part slowly, because the next 60 seconds describe the single worst decision of Cesare Borgia's life, and he made it with his eyes open. The first conclave elects a compromise, an old and dying man who takes the name Pius III and obliges everyone by lasting 26 days. Then the real conclave assembles, in late October 1503, and Cesare Borgia holds the deciding cards, the votes of the Spanish cardinals, his father's men, enough to make or block a pope. And the strongest candidate is Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere. Understand who this man is. Della Rovere is the Borgia's oldest, deepest enemy, a man who spent nearly 10 years of Alexander's papacy in self-imposed exile in France, out of reach, because he believed the Borgias would poison him, a man whose hatred of that family was the organizing fact of his career. This is the enemy Cesare had helped injure for a decade. And